It's cliche to say Silicon Valley is a crazy culture and the rest of the world is behind, and Europe is behind technologically or with innovation or the entrepreneurial mindset. Do you think that those stereotypes are true about American entrepreneurialism and innovation and the Silicon Valley culture of go even faster, move fast to break things?
Yes, I do think so. In my personal experience, I think it's just the risk, the willingness to take risks. And I think my best experience with that was when I started selling. So I was basically now a solo entrepreneur again. When I approached companies to buy IPfolio, the early version, I did not have big names to go out with. I was a nobody. And so I walk into what was at the time already a public company. It was, they made switches. The name escapes me now. And so I do my demo and everyone likes the product. And then they ask the dreaded question, well, how big is your company? And I'm like, we're 2 people plus a developer. I thought that was it. This public company will never buy from this no-name, more or less solo startup. And they said, oh, wow, that's so cool. This is great. We'd love to buy from you because 15 years ago, this company was basically just 3 people in a garage. And someone trusted them and bought their product.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guest is Rupert Mayer, the former CEO and founder of IPfolio, an intellectual property IP management software for very large companies that have hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of trademarks and patents that they need to manage and administrate and curate and evaluate. It's a whole industry unto itself. And he talks about moving from Austria and Germany to California, building a version of this software on the Salesforce platform himself, the vibe coding of 10 years ago, selling to big companies, growing it up, and eventually selling his company as a practical founder. He talks about his approach selling to big companies in this complex enterprise game and how he eventually grew and sold his company. It's a great episode with Rupert. Hi, Rupert. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast.
Hey, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've talked a few times about all your adventures in software. You're an adventurous builder entrepreneur. We're going to talk about your software company, IPfolio. Where are you today, Rupert? Where in the world is Rupert?
Physically in Berkeley, California.
Yes. You have the bright sunshine coming through your windows there. I look a little darker here in Dallas. It's about to rain and all that kind of thing. And you don't have a Berkeley accent. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Austria, Europe. Born in Denmark, but that's another story.
And were you in Vienna, the big city, or somewhere in the hills?
Kind of around Vienna. So we moved around a little bit and I grew up outside Vienna and then went to college in Vienna and started my career in the city.
Okay. And now you're in California, which is let's say, I don't know if would you call that a very different place or is that a European style community?
Last week I was in Tokyo and Bangkok, and those are very different places. I think in the big picture, California and Central Europe, where I grew up, are not all that different.
Yeah, there we go. Great. Well, we're going to talk about your software practical founder journey with IPfolio, which you built and grew and sold through all the adventures. And now you're on the other side of it. What is and what was IPfolio, and who did it serve?
So IPfolio was and still is quite successfully a enterprise software application. It's a somewhat obscure niche of enterprise software. It's managing IP as an intellectual property. So if a company, typically it's larger companies, if they have enough patents and trademarks, then at some point they need a software to track all the activities around these intellectual assets. You could call it a CRM for ideas. If you think about a big company, ideas emerge, whether it's a new product idea or a new technology or refinement idea or a new idea for a brand name. And as these new products or new businesses are developed, the IP is developed alongside, so that once you have a business, you can actually have some protection around it, protection for the technology in the form of patents, protection for the brand in the form of trademarks. And once that gets big enough, there's quite a bit to manage around the intellectual property, and the software basically supports that.
So big companies, the practical founders out there, when we think of IP, we think of our code and maybe our brand or something like that. But big companies have teams of people that manage this important asset. For instance, if a pharmaceutical company did something wrong with a patent and lost the patent, right? That's, a major important thing. Or a trademark, if they didn't renew their trademark or enforce it in
Yeah.
the right way or manage it in the right way. Coca-Cola, it's a major asset for them. But are there teams that do this in big companies all over the world?
Yes. So bigger companies typically have entire IP teams. Typically, they are part of the legal team, and they are attorneys and paralegals and subject matter experts and people who reach out to the people in the business unit to actually create these ideas,
Okay.
again, whether it's brands or whether it's technology. And let's say at the very high end, the largest companies in the world might have 500-ish people in their IP team. But a
Wow.
typical company where you think of, oh, that's a large company, a company with maybe 1,000 employees, might just hire their first IP attorney and be a solo in-house IP department. So if you think about how big the sales team or the engineering team of any of those companies is, the IP team is very, very small in comparison.
Right. And I never thought of it this way, but the way you described it, it's kind of a funnel or a life cycle or something, ideas,
It
potential,
is.
what things could we patent? What do you got out there? What are you working on? What's in process? Where are we with that? What do we have? What's important? What do we need to do next? Did we renew the trademark?
Exactly.
Did
Exactly.
trademark enforcement, did we sue that little guy in the small town, for bad use and all that?
All of that. All of that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, as I understand it, you built it on the Salesforce platform, on the
Mhm.
force.com platform. So you're selling to big companies, but you didn't have to be a big company yourself to build something, quote, enterprise ready or
Mhm.
something, or
Mhm.
pretty quickly and get up and running pretty quickly. So was the whole platform built on top of the Salesforce, as a lot of apps were?
Yes. So this product was entirely built on Salesforce, and in my the previous phase of my career, we had built something from scratch in Europe with a large team for basically serving Europe's big companies. And the mindset in my old European company was more of, we all have to build it. We have to build it all ourselves. So there was a
Yes.
lot of coding
Those were the
involved.
days.
That was a different time, of course. Those were the early 2000s.
Yeah.
But when I got to the US, Salesforce, SaaS, SaaS was just really becoming a thing. Salesforce had
Yeah.
just, I think, hit $1 billion in revenue. Dreamforce had 50,000 attendees. And
Yeah.
I felt like something
The
big
wave.
is in the making here, a new way to build software. And when I found it challenging to sell our European product, although so many developer hours had gone into it to sell that in the US, and I figured I needed a different product for the US market. I thought, okay, I could probably build this on Salesforce in a fraction of the time that we had needed to build the European enterprise software 10 years earlier.
Well, a few weeks ago, I had Blakely Graham on from TaskRay, another popular Salesforce app.
I
That
remember them. Yes,
Yeah,
I
right.
think I was. We
Y-
used them for project management at some
Excellent.
point.
She'll be glad to hear that. Well, she calls it like it's not quite vibe coding, but she could, it was a revelation because on top of all this enterprise security and authorization management and so forth, you could build database apps without really being a programmer pretty quickly, right? And So you could kind of build things quickly, kind of like you can with vibe coding in an app on top of a platform or something like that. But with vibe coding with AI tools these days, so it was a revelation. There's a lot of tools built on Salesforce quickly and let's say more scalably than stitching it together yourself. So I guess you did a version on it. We'll come back to that and learn more. And you grew the company as well. How big did IPfolio, your company, get uh, at the time you sold it?
So we had grown to a team of around 40 people. So
Hmm.
we were still obviously a startup.
Yeah,
And we were just in that phase of trying to become a real company, as
yeah,
you might call it. So it was early days, still, I think up to 20 people. It's very much everyone knows everyone, everyone wears many hats. And then around that time, you really have to start putting some structure in. And we tried to do that all within 6 months. We raised
yeah.
a strategic investment. So we were 20 people. We were working really well. We hired another 20 people because we thought we need to grow this and
Sorry
grow
to hear
that.
that. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that was a little too fast and actually got us in trouble. But yeah, we
Mm.
might get back to that later.
Yes. Uh huh. Yeah. And then at some point you sold the company as well.
Yeah, that's another interesting story. I sold it to a company that was about 10 times bigger than we were. They had around 400 people. They were based in Germany. We were a great complement. We had software, they had services, and we were a challenger in the market because
Yes.
the market leader, the Goliath in our market, was another 10 times bigger. They were a global organization with 4,000 people. But then, as a twist of fate, just a few months after I sold my small company to that mid-sized company, they sold to the big company. So from being the David against Goliath,
Right.
and fighting the incumbents and being the challenger in the market, suddenly we were a very small piece of the market leader. And then that company sold to a public global company with more than 10,000 employees. So it was post-acquisition, a very interesting journey to go
Wow.
from startup
Yeah.
to fast-growing, mid-sized private equity financed company to large, more traditional, risk-averse, trying to protect its market, private equity funded company to then being part of a public company.
Wow. That's crazy. And about what years was that? The acquisition and the years after?
So the acquisition was 2019, and then I ended up leaving in 2022.
Okay. And did you sell all of your company at the time and then work with them to keep the product going and so forth?
Yes,
Or
I
were
did.
there, okay, yeah.
So it
Okay.
was an all-out sale. But yes, obviously you have these things like earnouts that keep you that keep you
Yeah. Uh-huh.
motivated to stay on. But I also had this personal motivation to really take care of my product and my team.
Sure.
We were kind of forced to sell earlier than I had ever wanted to because
Uh-huh.
we got ourselves into trouble with trying to grow too fast after the Series A investment, burning through all the money within a year. And then I still wanted my product to, I didn't sell because I wanted out. I sold because I didn't really have a lot of better options. And I really wanted my product to succeed and become the market leader. And I wanted my team to succeed. So I
Yeah.
had 3 very interesting years doing that in a environment that changed rapidly every single year because we became an ever smaller mosaic piece of an ever larger organization. But
Right.
in the end, it all turned out pretty well. And our IPfolio now is the flagship IP management product of that very big global company. And half of the early team is still there.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's really been thriving. So in 22,
Well,
I
yeah.
realized,
Yeah.
okay, or I figured for myself, I can step back now. My part is done, and I can leave it in good hands.
Yeah, very responsible founder thinking there, right? It isn't just about the money and screw you. You got to put up with what you need to make sure your product and your team has a good home that keeps going. I've been there a few times there. So you grew up in Austria. How did you end up in Berkeley? Was it you just wanted to be there or was part of your software career journey? Or, you're in California now. So can you take us back to how you got involved in the IP technology game and how you ended up in California?
Yeah, totally. So one thing I think, being maybe prone to a somewhat nomadic lifestyle or always
Ah,
being very open to living in new places. I don't know whether that's in your genes or it's part of your upbringing, but I did mention I was born in Denmark because my parents moved
yeah.
to Denmark. My dad basically took an expat assignment, so it was kind of a little bit in my childhood already being used to moving around, and then we lived in a few different places in Austria, and until we settled outside Vienna. And so I always, I think, had that in me to want to live in
Yeah.
different places. So I had the great privilege and opportunity to spend a year in the US as an exchange student, a high school exchange student during my
Mhm.
sophomore year. I went to New Jersey. I loved it.
Yeah.
Then later I studied in Spain for a year in my basically, yeah, the junior year of college. And it was always in me to, yeah, maybe move to different places whenever
Yeah.
I had the opportunity. And I started my career, I stumbled into this whole IP management industry by interning in a patent law firm in Vienna toward the end of my college years in my early 20s, and really liked that world. It was very interesting at the intersection of technology and law and business. It was very international. That was in the late 90s. So every morning, a huge pile of mail and faxes would land on the desk from all around the world, from Japan, from Brazil, from the
Wow.
US, of course. And I loved that. It was kind of vibrant. And so, yes, I interned there a couple of summers. And then I aspired to actually become a patent attorney myself.
Mhm.
But I also did a little bit of software. It wasn't even software development. I think I did some word
Yeah.
forms for the law firms, but
Mm.
somehow that made me the software expert. And then that was the Y2K. You remember Y2K?
Yeah.
The world was
Mhm.
gonna end. Planes were
Yes.
gonna fall from the sky. Elevators were
When
gonna
the
get
when
stuck.
ev when all the computer clocks went from 1999 to 2000, there was a fear that the software wasn't written to have that in mind. It did nothing fell apart that I'm aware of, but, that was a
Everything would
big
go
day.
back to 1900, right? And all the software would fail. And I think it was a big deal. And the global consulting industry earned
Yeah.
billions and billions and billions fixing all the software in the planes and the elevators and the trains. So
Yeah.
luckily, nothing crashed. And I did that at the smallest of scales for this one patent law firm in Vienna who was fearing that their trademark renewal due dates, trademarks
Oh.
renew only every 10 years. So if you had last renewed a certain trademark, let's say for Pfizer in 1997, then the part of what the software did would put a reminder on the docket for 10 years later, 2007. And they feared that those due dates would all land in 1907 and they would miss very important due dates. That could, in the worst case, if you don't renew an important trademark, it could literally cost billions of dollars.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was a big, almost existential worry for the law firm. And of all people, they asked me, who had created a few word forms, to build them a new
Yeah.
database. And I said,
Right.
wow, yeah, this is exciting. And that's how I got into patent management software.
This episode is brought to you by my friends at LaunchBay. LaunchBay is built for B2B software companies where client onboarding is hands-on and messy. Think data collection, setup steps, approvals, training, and customization. If you're currently juggling onboarding through email threads, spreadsheets, shared docs, and way too many check-in meetings, LaunchBay pulls all of that into one clear system. It gives both your team and your clients full visibility into what's happening. It automates follow-ups and approvals and helps you onboard customers faster without adding more people or process overhead. Hundreds of practical software companies use LaunchBay to deliver a consistent, professional onboarding experience every time, so customers get value faster and teams stay sane. You can check it out at launchbay.com/practical and get 25% off the first 3 months of any LaunchBay plan. Now back to our podcast. It's kind of like the young kids who speak AI, right, and are using the tools that join a little company. They're empowered to do amazing things, which back in the day, that was amazing when PCs and spreadsheets and all these other tools came around.
Microsoft Access.
Yeah, the Access was the early vibe coding and FileMaker Pro, and all that. You didn't need to be a programmer to create some apps that were pretty cool there. But I don't know, was there a step in between that and your IPfolio cloud experience, I guess?
Yes, there was Munich. So the word of mouth spread around that I had saved that one law firm from Y2K, and then others wanted in. So I think even before the year 2000, two other law firms wanted to buy my software. So I productized my
Oh,
custom software that I built for
yeah.
the law firm, and I was doing pretty much everything myself. The coding, it was already, to your point, more vibe coding at the time. I'm not a trained software engineer. I'm a self-taught vibe coder, if you will, from Microsoft Access to Salesforce to now
Uh-huh.
using AI tools.
Yeah.
Then basically productized that, sold it to a bunch of other law firms, but the market was very limited, very finite. In all of Austria, there's not more than 24 patent
Yeah,
law
of course.
firms.
Mhm.
And so I knew to build this into a business, I needed to go elsewhere, preferably to Munich, which is the European patent capital, because it has not only the
Oh,
German patent office, but also the European patent office. So a lot of patent law firms internationally have an office in Europe,
interesting.
in Munich, next to the European Patent Office. So I decided to move to Munich, and around the same time, I met some guys who had founded another company, funnily also in Austria, that was doing IP management software for big corporations, namely for Siemens, the large
Yeah.
German
Mhm.
industrial conglomerate. I think they file 5,000 patents per year. So that's
Wow.
about almost as big as it gets. And so they had built this enormous
Wow.
database. It was web-based, which was very new in the early 2000s. And it had hundreds of thousands of patents of trademarks from all over the world from Siemens stored, and very robust processes around it. So it was a very different level than the little Access database for law firms that I had created. And I also found it more interesting and more fascinating to work for the industry, because you're closer to
Yeah.
the innovation. In the law firm,
Right.
everything is quite administrative in nature. You have these due dates, you have
Yeah.
forms to fill for the patent office, you have fees to pay to the patent office, and the software automates all that. But in the corporate context, you're much closer to where does the innovation happen, what technologies are these companies creating, and how are they creating the technologies to build their next generation of products, etc. So I ended up teaming up with that Austrian company that was making the software for Siemens, that was also on a similar trajectory of trying to productize that and make it work for other companies. And so we ended up landing really interesting clients like SAP and Airbus and Philips, many other big European technology companies at the time. And we built that company quite successfully for about 10 years. And at that point, I said, we have to go global. We have a really nice footprint now in the US, in Europe. We have to go to the US. And
And you
I,
volunteered
volun-
yourself. I mean,
I
yeah, right, yeah.
volunteered to go. Exactly.
Pick me. That's great. So you went to the US, and how did that go?
Yeah, it didn't go that well. Similarly, and I had skipped that when I was trying to sell my Austrian software to the big law firms in Munich. I had a really hard time because there were already established competitors who were bigger. I was still solo. There were real companies in Germany with maybe 10, 15, 20 people who could provide a more robust software, more service, etc. And I ended up never making
Yeah.
big inroads into the German market with my patent attorney software that always remained confined to Austria pretty much. But then I found this new partnership with the company that was making software for the industry, and I found that more exciting. And so I pivoted to that. And somewhat analogously, when I came to the US with my big industry software and my big European names, my Airbus, Siemens, Philips
Yeah, uh-huh.
client list, No one was very impressed by that in the
Oh,
US. And when I demoed the software, they were even less impressed because it was very European. It was over engineered for US needs. In the US, everyone wants software to be easy to use and
yeah.
simple, and maybe to some degree even sexy, like a fancy dashboard, something to show up to management. And our Siemens born software was anything but that.
Yeah. And so did you leave to go create IPfolio or create it within that other organization?
We created it as an in-house project. So I reported back to my partners back in Austria, hey, this is going to be an
Wow.
uphill battle. I'm really struggling to get any traction here. But there's this whole new world. So the US requires a very different type of software. But I just went to Dreamforce, and there's this whole new world of Salesforce and cloud. And this is amazing. I think we can build something from scratch. And of course, we know with the mindset back in Austria of building everything in house, that was very, very new for them. But they said, sure, well, try, go write code. And
Yeah.
so I built a prototype on Salesforce, and we decided to launch a new product that would be very, very different from what we had built in Europe, sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum of the market. While in Europe, our product was so complex that it only was only
Wow.
targeted to really the biggest of the biggest in the industry. We want to build a super lightweight, simple, easy to use, accessible product for much smaller companies, for like these companies with 1,000 people that had
Right.
just hired their first in-house patent attorney or trademark attorney, and that just wanted to migrate from a spreadsheet where maybe they had kept their 200 patents records to something more robust, where they had a nice dashboard, where they could
Yeah.
collaborate with the outside law firms, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the initial value proposition. Try to build something at the opposite end of the spectrum. And then in the best case, the two would converge. The big system would become a little more accessible for mid-sized companies, and the small system would grow, and we could cover the whole market. So it was, yeah, that was the outset.
So who built, the Salesforce version of IPfolio, this new, smaller, lighter, easier version?
Pretty much me, because
Yeah.
that's the way I had built my law firm
Yeah.
product
You remember
myself.
this? It's a database-driven workflow kind of app,
Yeah.
right?
It's very point and click. And then I did hire a developer offshore in India to help me with some of the coding when it came to APIs, trying to pull data from patent offices where I was out of my depth.
Yeah. So it's a little bit like the modern, look what I coded over the weekend myself and then hire a little engineer, but you don't need the old teams that we used to 2010 around that time or whatever. There were still a lot of big software teams creating
Mhm.
big software, and you could move pretty quickly. Did you start, you were, I mean, it was just the US division of one who was you, who was building and selling and all of that? Or what, did you spin it out as a separate company or did it maintain,
We
become?
actually ended up
Right.
spinning it out before we launched the product because it became apparent that we had very respectful conversations with my partners back at home, but we just lived in two different worlds. Just the
Yes.
way they
We
had
don't
been trained
understand. Right.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
think working with these big corporations, everything was very waterfall. When they developed a new inventor incentive module for Siemens, they would spend a year specifying it very in every detail and then handing over the specification document to the development team, then developing. And Salesforce, it was much more like every day, just change something on the fly. We didn't have separate production and testing or development environment. Everything was very just hack it, move fast and break things. It was such a different approach. And to them, it was so alien that
Right.
you could build a real product for real companies that way, that we figured at some point this is not going to work. And so I offered, let's just spin it out. I will sell some shares in the old companies to fund the new company. The old company retained 1/3 stake in IPfolio,
Wow. Yeah.
and off I was on my own.
Yeah, independent. I'm trying to imagine if there's even a word for on the fly in German, right? Which is a not very on the fly, off the cuff, just make it up kind of culture, right? Which is ideal for patents and processes and things like that. But, and some of it's big company versus small startup and all of that kind of thing. But was this kind of a cultural difference that you weren't as German-oriented culture as that these, or is this just a big company, small company, startup kind of thing? What is it, there's a European culture there, I think, too.
Yes, probably a bit of both, but I think for some reason I was probably more American or already in my mindset, or
Yeah.
more ready to be Americanized or embrace
Yes.
the move fast and break things
Yeah.
spirit and ethos. And of course, living here and seeing it is a different experience than living in Europe and experience that culture. And again, them working with big companies that just work so differently. And also
Yeah.
the companies we sold to, right? We basically sold to emerging Silicon Valley companies over here
Yeah.
that were operating that same way and that wanted us to move fast and break things. They wanted the latest and greatest feature, the latest API to pull in patent office data so people, they wouldn't have to hire someone to key in the data from the paper
Right.
notices that the patent office has sent them. And in Europe, they built elaborate processes for people to key in the data or to scan the paper that came from the patent office. And here the mentality was always, well, why can't we leapfrog that? Do we ever
Yeah.
need paper from the patent office? Can we pull that directly from the patent office? It was just a very different mindset.
It's cliche to say Silicon Valley is a crazy culture and the rest of the world is behind, and Europe is behind, technologically or with innovation or the entrepreneurial mindset. Americans are crazier to go try things and buy things compared to the rest of the world. But do you think that those stereotypes are true about American entrepreneurialism and innovation and the Silicon Valley culture of go even faster, move fast to break things?
Yes, I do think so. In
Okay.
my personal experience,
Yeah.
it was. I think it's just the risk, the willingness to take
Ah.
risks. And I think my best experience with that was when I started selling. So I was basically now a solo entrepreneur again. When I approached companies to buy IPfolio, the early version, I did not have big names to go out with. Oh, we're already selling to Siemens and Philips and Airbus. This
Uh-huh.
is our client list. I was a nobody. And so I walked we went to conferences with our little booth and showed the product with the fancy dashboards. And people said, wow, that's cool. It's not just gray old Windows style lists of due dates. This is actually, we were visualizing the portfolio. This looks so much cooler. And I wanted to come in and demo to my team next week. And so I walk into what was at the time already a public company. It was, they made switches. The name
Mm.
escapes me now. And so I do my demo and everyone likes the product. And then they ask the dreaded question, well, how big is your company? And I'm like, we're two people plus a developer. And I thought that was it. This public company will never buy from this no-name,
Uh-huh.
more or less solo startup. And they said, oh, wow, that's so cool. This is great. We'd love to buy from you because 15 years ago, this company was basically just three people in a garage. Then someone trusted them and bought their product. And that to me was mind-boggling. That's a very, very different mindset.
Yeah.
Embracing risk when they see an opportunity and just being open and also generous in a way that is not easy to find in Europe, I think.
I think. Well, Cisco was a big switch seller back then. Could it have been Cisco or one of their
Not that
competitors?
big.
Okay, yeah. Okay, right. So great. So here you are, you're in the States, you've left the previous company, you're building this thing on your own with a little help and trying to sell it. How long were you a one-man band getting some initial customers and listening to what they're saying and going back and adding the features and trying to find another customer?
Yeah, I was not exactly a one-man band because
Okay.
when we were still part of a project within Unicom, we had hired a great marketing person. So she
Oh,
was
okay.
with me for the first 6 or 9 months, but then unfortunately she left. So she basically did all the marketing and sales, the whole
Yeah.
go-to-market part,
Oh, great.
built the
Uh-huh.
website, created the
Mhm.
messaging and the branding, et cetera, et cetera. So I was the product person, and she was the go-to-market person. And then unfortunately, she left because she moved away. And then I hired another, basically found a successor to her, who was again a woman. She was more sales than marketing, but the marketing, the branding had already been built. And so she was from the industry and she knew a lot of
Oh,
people. And so basically for 2 full years, I think we were a one-man, one-woman band plus one offshore developer somewhere half a world away. So three-person band, if you will. And then we started seeing some growth. And then we slowly, I think for another year, all of 2014, we were a four-person band. We hired a customer success wizard, whisperer, who basically took over all the customer facing work, all the implementation and configuration of the system and the training. And he was amazing. So that was the third year, 2014. And then in 2015, in the fourth year, things really started taking off and we started, growing the team more.
and did you have any funding at the time, or was this all customer funding and living lean and, you
It
know?
was all bootstrapped. So there was
Mhm.
some customer funding by basically asking for payment in advance. We always did 1 year upfront contract, which
Yeah.
Salesforce had taught us. And I think was already becoming customary in enterprise at that time. But of course, that
Yeah.
alone, we were doing very small contracts. A lot of our customers were just paying a few $1,000s a year. So we needed a lot of customers to even fund one person's salary. And so it was mainly, yes, initially I bootstrapped with just the money I'd taken out of selling shares of my old European company. But then friends and family started to ask whether they can invest. And that was also
Oh,
very new. This whole idea of friends and family investors. I mean, in Austria, if you become an entrepreneur and your parents have money, they might maybe lend you some money. But the idea of investing, of buying a few shares, I think that is also very, very American. And yes, the more the word spread, the more I got interest from friends and family and former business partners to be part of
yeah.
this and to become investors. And I ended up, raising almost $1 million in total over 4 years or so from friends, families, and former business partners.
You did this, and it sounds like you were the product guy. You had engineering build it, and you had sales selling it, and you were figuring things out and doing everything in between, and you grew this, and you guys listened to customers and add features and talk to more people and kinda move forward here. You say things started to take off. What happened at that inflection point? Was it just long enough in the market that you had enough customers and people recognized you, or something else, a shift in your business?
You mean how we got on the hockey stick? What was the
Well, you
inflection
said
point
you were
to?
4 people and then you started to move a little faster. How did that go?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was a few customers that were really impactful. So of course, you learn from every customer. You always refine the product. A lot of customers, you have to build a feature or two or three for them to actually buy. But then we got into Google. So not so yeah, we're sold to a lot of the Silicon Valley companies that came out big around that time. So Dropbox
Ah,
was one of our early customers, and then Square, and then GoPro and Zynga, the gaming company. And the cool thing in this IP
IPO,
industry is,
IPO, IPO, right, yeah.
yes, and that's typically, you would think they file patents earlier, but the truth is most of those companies, they file maybe one seminal patent and then they file three more, and only once they get close to IPO, suddenly they realize, oh, I have to play this numbers game. I have to file
Wow,
100 patents to have something to defend myself, because people will start suing me. They will start coming
yeah.
after me now that I'm a public company, or even ahead of going public. The After announcing that you go public, a lot of people will sue you because they can kind of blackmail you. They sabotage your IPO if
Yeah,
you
uh-huh.
don't pay them off. So when they prepare to go public, they realize we have to build our patent stack. So they hire their first in-house patent attorney with goals to file 100 patents. And so that person often has to create awareness, especially in tech, especially in software. Software patents are a little bit controversial. Not all software engineers
Yeah.
are great
Yeah.
fans of patents. Very
Yes.
different than in traditional industries like pharma that you mentioned earlier. And so this new patent person really needs a lot of help, and the software is quite an important piece of that, putting the infrastructure in place for getting 100 patents not only filed, but then also through the process of foreign filing and translations and renewals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where we came in. So all these companies that I mentioned were around that time. And then word got around, and suddenly I was invited to present at Google, which was, of course, at the time already a behemoth,
Yeah.
and they were filing thousands of patents per year. And I couldn't even believe that Google would talk to me because we were really still small. And it turned out Google wasn't interested for Google proper, but they were starting to plan the alphabet
Ah,
reorganization of the
right.
company and spinning out all these companies that
Oh,
became Waymo and Verily and Nest and DeepMind, et cetera, et cetera. Some of them they've spun in again. So it's been very interesting to watch. But we were part of that early. They knew they had a pretty
yeah.
big, sort of heavily customized enterprise style IP management system for Google. And they realized it would be way too clunky for, let's say, a new startup like Waymo. And they thought, well, maybe this IPfolio thing is what we need for these other bets.
Oh, great.
And turned out it was a great fit. And we started working first with Verily, then Google X, then Waymo, and a few others. And those just turned to be transformative customers for us because they were
Oh,
incredibly smart, incredibly lean, incredibly demanding, but in a good way, also incredibly supportive. So they were
yeah.
exactly the epitome of that
Oh,
risk-taking mindset. We want to work with the disruptor, with the company that's most likely to
move
get
fast.
us what we want, and not in a traditional way. And because we are different, we think different, we're ahead of the curve, and we need the partner, and they saw that in us. And so they really pushed us hard and completely took our product to the next level. And then, of course, they also was also not the worst reference and word of mouth
Right.
to have
Yeah.
Waymo on your customer list. And so I think that was so that there were many great customers who
Oh, good.
helped us, pushed us, and yes, basically helped us succeed and wanted us to succeed, but none was as transformative as Alphabet.
Well, that's a challenging thing for startups to sell to big companies
Mhm,
anywhere. Silicon Valley has the most amenable environment. They could remember when they were startups and they want to stay on the cutting edge. So, more Silicon Valley billion-dollar companies will buy from startups
mhm,
than probably in any other part of the world. I'm here
mhm,
in Dallas. There's huge companies here, and it's very difficult for little companies to sell to big companies, even in Dallas, and less so in Germany and so forth. So it's been a superpower of Silicon Valley to hoist them up. And
mhm,
they also know they can influence your roadmap and help you be better. They can get the product that's designed for them. They can, if they're an important customer, they get to nudge you
mhm.
and support you. So, and you survived. You came out on the other
Yeah.
side, passed the test, and got to the other side. What other changes were going on in the business? Presumably, you had more employees, and I don't know if there are other pivots or adjustments that were happening in between your early startup days and now your growing days.
Yes, part of it was that we moved up enterprise. So we moved quite away from this original vision of building something super lightweight, something for the solo in-house patent attorney to
Ah,
replace their spreadsheet, but not much more. So it became much more of a collaborative tool for somewhat larger IP teams to collaborate. And we were also getting interest from bigger, more traditional companies around the same time. And of course, those had very
yeah,
different requirements. They had much more compliance requirements. Security reviews were becoming a thing, which
yeah.
before
Mhm.
were not. Um, and but even in that respect, Google I think they had probably the most sophisticated IT security review
Ah,
process, but also the most challenging in a good way. Some of these
yeah.
processes from more traditional companies were just endless forms with endless questions, where you just try to find a way to check every box. And Google's was different, very to the point, really trying to find weaknesses and then help you overcome these weaknesses.
Oh,
So, of
wow.
course, we had to get SOC 2 compliance as part of that. And we had to just in many ways mature as a company. And the surprising thing was how big having built on Salesforce
I
was.
was just gonna ask you, what were the benefits and or
Yes.
challenges of, building on Salesforce? But
That
you could say Salesforce does a lot of this for me,
exactly.
right? So
And
what
that
was
ended
that?
up being the biggest benefit. So I didn't choose
Oh,
Salesforce for any of that because I didn't anticipate it. I chose Salesforce because it was
alright.
the vibe coding tool of its time. It was the easiest way for me to just hack together something that looks like a product. And I had no idea how much the underlying stack, the sophistication of how Salesforce manages their data centers, the sophistication of the permissions and privileges architecture within Salesforce and the data segregation and all of that stuff that big companies will ask for, how absolutely fundamental that would be to our success and to the speed with which we could pivot up market.
In other words, that, the SOC 2 forms or whatever, some 75% of that was just part of
Salesforce,
you were part of
exactly.
Salesforce. Yeah, right, yeah.
Salesforce data center
Okay.
report, Salesforce disaster recovery report, Salesforce uptime report, whatever. Yes.
Yeah. And so when you sold to enterprise, how big were the deals starting to be, annual deals?
They went into the six figures.
Okay, yeah. Very exciting. And, you were growing up as a CEO and all of that. Any growing
Yeah.
pains in the company? Still hadn't raised any funding yet other than some friends and family, and you were, heading forward?
Yeah, so now we're probably around 2016, 2017. In 2016, I think we hit the 1 million ARR mark, and we were growing at 100% year over year. So 2017, I think already, yeah, I think May 2016 we hit the million, and then early 2017 we already had 2 million. So there was a
Wow.
period where we grew more than 100%, and it was just super exciting. It was still this
Yeah.
relatively small team. We were 15 people, but everyone was carrying a lot of wearing a lot of hats, and yeah, it felt. Looking back, that was probably the most exciting time of
Yeah. It's
building the
working,
company.
right?
Yes.
We're changing the world.
And suddenly
That's
we're
what
chasing these really big enterprise accounts where we're getting closer to the 500,000 ARR. But those were also, yes, much more challenging. So suddenly we couldn't really
yeah.
get away with the vibe thing, especially as we configured the software. So you have the software.
Oh,
Salesforce also had the benefit of being highly configurable. They have these great point and click workflow tools where you can build very complex workflows. And the big companies had very, very complex
yes.
workflows. So, for example, we sold to a French pharma multinational, one of the biggest pharma companies in the world. And I think they have more than 100,000 trademarks. And so trademark renews every 10 years. So on average, they renew 10,000 trademarks a year. And every single trademark renewal decision, every single country follows a very sophisticated 7-step approval process where you first determine how much product revenue is associated with that trademark and is that product
Oh my
going
goodness.
to be around
Yeah.
for the next 10 years, or is it actually a product that we might be killing in the next year? Then maybe we're not renewing the trademark, or maybe we have already killed the product. If not, are we still do we want to preserve the brand? And is the trademark being, yeah, if you're not using the trademark anymore, then in some companies it actually goes away or it becomes susceptible for
Yes.
others to attack it. So it's much more complex than just a yes/no decision and every renewal costs money, of course. So they have this incredible process with hundreds of stakeholders, which is their trademark renewal process. And we had to model that in Salesforce. And it really got us to our limits
Whoa.
of what you can vibe code, and you have to very, very carefully document. Of course, then they wanted very careful documentation and testing procedures and all that. And that was a big step for us. Suddenly, our team of consultants who were doing that implementation work was bigger than our team of software developers that were building
Right.
the core product. And we weren't really set up very well to handle that. We did hire people who had that experience, but we had been selling heavily on how easily it is to configure our system and how we can do everything in a fraction of the time. And the actual configuration work still took a fraction of the time than it would take with traditional tools like the one of my old European company. But
Yeah.
all the overhead of defining requirements and
Yeah.
documenting them and reviewing them and getting sign off and testing, that doesn't really become much less. So suddenly
Yeah.
we were taking 80% of the time of what would be a traditional implementation project that took 2 years. And it was a pretty hard transition for us.
Moving forward, maybe a little bit faster, but like, how did you get through that and then eventually led to selling the company? Were your hopes that if you raised funding, you could retool the software and, reposition yourself?
Yeah, we didn't really need to retool. We just needed to grow on many fronts. So also the software
Uh,
development, since it all had started with vibe coding, we didn't have a robust software development process in place. So we had to fix that and build a real engineering organization, because at some point it just can't vibe code it anymore.
uh-huh.
And then also on the consulting part, the implementation projects, we had to build a real organization. And of course, to support all that, we need to grow the sales, and we need to build a real sales team, and do much more sophisticated marketing, etc. And so, with all that in mind, what I call building the fully, what did I call it? The fully featured company or something like that. We went out to raise money, and we raised $3 million from a strategic investor, so a company we were partnering with.
So you didn't attempt to I mean, you were in Silicon Valley, but, like, you didn't attempt to raise from VCs and outside investors
I
or
tried, but I always knew that our story wasn't quite big enough.
Yeah, of
It
course.
is a niche, and the global market for this kind of software might be an addressable market, might be somewhere around $1 billion. That's just not big enough for VC. So we're always struggling to find what kind of funding would actually work for us. We were too small for private equity and not profitable enough, not a big enough multi-billion-dollar growth story for VCs. So
Right.
the strategic investor just turned out to be the right fit for us.
Okay, so your assumption was if I just had twice as many of everybody at every department, we would win, right? And then you went forward on that and doubled the company, right? Doubled the company size.
Yes, try to really aggressively build out all these departments, all these core functional units of the company to be best practice, industry standard, and well run and well organized. And that was just a big lift to do in
Yeah.
6 months. And also I think we raised the funding at peak expectations when we had grown 100% year over year for 3 years. And of course, we projected that we could do that for another 3 years if we could just hire enough
Oh, there's
people.
the trap right there, right?
But
The
yeah,
dotted line. Yes. Uh-huh.
exactly. The demand didn't quite materialize. We were chasing these ever bigger deals, which took ever longer to close. And also, if, for example, we had been very successful with all the alphabets that I mentioned earlier
Yeah.
with the Google spinoffs, and we were chasing the mothership, and we were almost certain that we would win Google proper
Oh,
in that year. That was 2017-18, and we didn't. They went
oh,
another route, very surprisingly. Same way we were chasing Apple, but Apple is really difficult to
yeah.
to sell to. Their procurement is pretty brutal, and we pretty much walked away because we felt that is gonna crush us. And so yeah, we lost some very big chunks of our pipeline. And so while we had hired up for continued exponential growth, the growth curve went like this. And after about a year, we had burned through our 3 million with not
Yeah.
very much to show for it.
And so now you have a board, we put some money in and we're going to have these reports and all of that. Did you decide, okay, it's time to sell the company, or was it a board consensus, or was there some conflict about that, or?
It was a good experience to have a real board that holds you accountable, and but it was a little late. So they already saw the issues with our pipeline early on, and I was just so confident. And I had
Ah,
never done very sophisticated pipeline arithmetic, but they already told us if you want to close 3 million new business, then you better have at least 12 million pipeline, because much more than a 25% win
yeah,
rate is probably not successful. It's not realistic. And I thought, oh, we're going to win Google, we're going to win Apple, we're going to win these and
yeah,
those companies. And yeah, they ended up being right. And
yeah.
so as the year progressed and we were burning through the money, we were not closing those deals, they started asking, well, what's the plan here? And I was like, don't worry, we'll just keep going.
No, really? Yeah.
And
Mhm.
around mid-year, I was also starting to get a little bit concerned. And that's when they approached us and asked us, well, we think we need to buy you to to save you from hitting the wall. And so then and yeah, the truth
So
was.
your strategic investor that you had
Mhm,
partnered with, and they were in the industry,
mhm.
they ended up acquiring you.
Yes.
Okay. And did you have any negotiation leverage in this deal, or did they kind of name their price and you thought it was fair enough or something like that, given the circumstances?
Yeah, since we had our backs pretty much against the wall, we did not have a great negotiating position. But on the other hand, we knew that they really needed us too, because
Yeah.
these service companies that sell all the services around patents and trademarks, the renewals and the translations and the recordals, where the name change when you sell a trademark, there's a lot of just bureaucracy that needs to be handled. And for them, the software is the best hub to connect those services to. And
Right.
so the service companies have always the service. If you look at the overall IP market, IP management industry, it's probably 90% services
I
and
see.
only
Right.
10% software. And the service players have always bought the software companies, because when you are the software client, your patents and trademarks are locked into that software. And if you build nice gateways, APIs to the services, so that you basically click a button in the software to translate the patent into Turkish, then that is a pretty compelling value proposition.
Right.
And our services partner had partnered with two companies, us and another company, but that other company had just been sold to the key
They
competitor.
needed you. Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
only had us, and they really needed us from a business perspective. But of course, they were private equity owned, and we did not negotiate with our long-term friends and partners. We negotiated with their private equity overlords, and they were not that friendly with us. But still, we knew they needed us, and it was a pretty tough negotiation. And we ended up with a decent outcome under the circumstances.
Okay. And you had strategic investors, you had your friends and family. Did your friends and family and former partners, did they do okay on this? They made some money on the
They
deal?
did
You
very
did
well
okay?
because they got in early, and that was always for me super important to
Yeah.
make them whole, because you do get some pressure from the later investors
Yeah.
to maybe not treat the early investors
Yeah.
always to their best advantage. And I'm seeing that now as an angel investor in all sorts of climate startups that are now going through later rounds. And suddenly it's like, oh, where am I being left? So I always had that. That was always, since it was friends and
Yeah.
family, but also just in general, I think my mindset was those were the people who wrote you the first $10,000 check. I'm certainly not gonna throw them under the bus. And so, yeah, we did everything we could to actually disproportionately favor the early
Yeah, very
investors
nice.
and the employees.
So you did okay enough to be an angel on the investor on the other side. And earlier you described how you sold it and then that smaller fish got acquired by a bigger fish and there was a lot of consolidation and you ended up working for, the big service provider, a public company there. How did it feel when you signed the papers and sold the company and you were going to keep going with it? But was there some relief and you got some money in your bank account after being a frugal, practical founder for so many years and all of that? Did you feel, it was a difficult time, I'm sure it always is, but what were your feelings at the time?
I think it was mostly relief because I had been a solo founder and all the weight was always on my shoulders of
Yeah.
running out of money and just the daily stresses. And I did feel very relieved to be able to have that responsibility lifted off my shoulders. I was a little bit worn out, I think, after that roller coaster of the peak ambition, peak expectation, and then that
Uh-huh.
very difficult year when we thought we would
Mm.
not really go out and conquer the world. So it was good to, and I was basically able to step back into my product role. So my
Oh, okay.
job
Great.
title
Oh,
changed from CEO to founder and chief of product. That was always at my core, where my heart is, where I'm
uh-huh.
best. I was never that interested in managing the sales team and doing the marketing strategy and then all that consulting and implementation stuff. I always tried to find people who could do that for me. But in the end, I was responsible for it. And now I was not responsible for it anymore. So
Okay.
that certainly felt good. And then also, I didn't get I didn't get a big check at the exit because part of the conditions that we negotiated against, not a great negotiating position, was that I had to reinvest almost all of my proceeds into the new company because they really wanted me on board to build something bigger together.
The new combined company, which got
Yes, the,
rolled
the
up and
company that
sold out,
we
right?
had sold to.
Yeah, right. And, did you eventually get your investment out of there?
A few years later, so after
Public
the
company? Yeah.
when the
Yeah.
mid-sized company was acquired by the big private equity-owned company, my holdings were rolled into my few percent in the big in the mid-sized company were rolled into a fraction of a percent in the now very big company. And then when that company sold to a public company, I got shares in the public company, but those were locked up for a year. So
Oh
it
my
was
gosh. Oh,
several years.
oh,
And only in hindsight do I realize how much risk there was in each
that's
of
a lot of
those
risk, yes.
phases. And hearing other founder stories who had sold for all stock and got left with almost nothing,
Right.
it's like, wow, I really, yes, I got out in
It's like
time and I got out well. And actually, that public company, the stock has been performing terribly because they basically acquired us, or the company that we were part of, at the peak
pink.
of
Yeah.
expectations as well. And their stock is now down almost 90%. But we sold almost all of it within months of the 12-month lockup period. So that's also an advice. If you can at all, take money off the table when
Yes.
you can, and because there's always more risk in the future than you would think, whether you're still in control, but even more so when you're not.
Right.
And diversify. Even if you sell to a great company and you think you'll conquer the world together, so many things might happen that are out of your
Yeah,
control.
stuff
So
happens.
when you get the chance to take chips off the table and to just diversify, then do it.
Congratulations on getting some chips out of that and finding a good home and, playing your chips and, winning there. What do you do with those chips now? It's been a few years. So, how do you, keep yourself busy? What's new for Rupert?
Yeah, I went through quite a transition. So when I decided that my job is done with IPfolio in 2022 and I could leave it in good hands, I had a pretty slow ramp down because they still wanted me around and my relations with the customers. But I had almost a year in which I was working less and less and ramping down my engagement and starting to pursue other things.
Okay.
And I thought, well, what do you do? Obviously, after your exit, you start angel investing. And I always had the mindset or the goal to do something good, to invest into something that has purpose and meaning rather than just trying to optimize for returns. And so started to search around, looked into all sorts of healthcare and life sciences startups, but felt like I'm completely out of my depth to judge which
Oh, right.
new
Yeah.
treatment or which new drug is gonna be the is gonna really make life better for a lot of people. And then I discovered climate tech, and I had always been concerned with the climate, but like so many people, didn't feel like there's that much I can do except putting solar on my roof and getting a heat pump and driving an electric car. But of course, I knew that all of that was not enough, and we're really a lot of things need to change in a big way. And so I started discovering this whole universe of climate tech startups and started realizing how big the problem is, but also how broad the spectrum of solutions is for decarbonizing transport and buildings
Yeah.
and industry and food systems. And I was like, wow, this is it. This is where I want to be. And so I did almost all of my angel investing in that space eventually. And then,
So you spend your time looking at the market and talking to people and going to these conferences where people are pitching, right? Like
kind
that
of,
kind of
yes.
thing, building relationships or
Y-
something?
Yes, going to a lot of conferences and to demo days, etc., sort of all within the climate tech ecosystem, which was really booming in late
Yeah.
21, early
Yeah.
22, when it was clean tech 2.0, a new
Yeah.
era.
Uh-huh.
Some very prominent and charismatic investors like Chris Sacca
Yeah, of course.
proclaiming this to be the next big thing, not only from an impact and purpose perspective, but also from an investor perspective. The whole world needs to move away from these millions of machines that burn fossil fuels towards being all electric and clean. And there's just so much business opportunity in there. So I fully bought into that. And yes, after 6 months or so, I had gotten so excited that although I was only making very small investments, I made so many of them that I basically burned through my through the chips that were available for that
Yeah, your little
activity.
fund. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I also realized I don't want to be an investor full time and just network and then place chips
Why is
and
that? A lot of
watch
people
them.
think I can be the investor. That's what I'll turn into.
Hmm.
Is it
But if
just
you're a
not as much
builder,
fun as running things? Yeah, right.
yeah. And so I realized I want to build things again. And I took a job at one of the companies I had invested
Oh,
in, a solar battery company here in Silicon Valley run by a friend of mine. And yeah, there really learned the renewable energy, home electrification, solar batteries, the grid, how it all
yeah.
plays together. And then, yes, after 1.5 years, for a number of reasons, I moved on from there. And then I was just turning 50 and I found myself for the very first time in the job market
Oh.
because, I had transitioned right out of college into this entrepreneurship
Mhm.
journey. And now I wanted to get a job in clean tech at one of those fast growing companies that were
Yeah.
inventing new batteries or electric boats or electric planes or other cool stuff. And it was difficult, to say the least. It was very challenging with my age and my profile, sort of very generalist profile. Most job descriptions are for a
And
very
your entrepreneurial profile. If you're the one who was the crazy adventurer, not every company wants to hire crazy entrepreneurs.
yes,
Some do,
yes.
but not all of them.
Actually, maybe just a few. I don't know. So I had, and I didn't spend a lot of time, but I thought I'd send out 20 resumes and I would get 20 interviews. But I said, because I was very deliberate on the companies that I applied to, I wanted to work for a really cool company. And well, I sent out 20 resumes. I got one interview, and that
Yeah.
remained just one interview. So that was a rather humbling experience. And then I thought, okay, what now? I probably will have to be a founder again. I don't think I will actually get a
Mhm.
job. And then I decided to enroll in the executive MBA program here at Berkeley at Haas,
Uh-huh.
just as one way to meet new people, learn new things, get involved in the whole Berkeley Haas entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Mhm.
And on the way there, tried a few more things, a few small projects, dabbled in climate finance, greening 401ks of fossil fuels. But yeah, that did not become a project for me. And then eventually, around the time I had started my MBA, I met Kevin Chu, who happens to be a prominent alum of the MBA program.
Mhm.
Actually, he did undergrad at Haas, and the
Oh, wow.
building that we study
Yeah.
in is Chu Hall. It's named after him. So,
Wow.
and he
And what was
approached.
his background? What was his thing?
He was so he did Haas undergrad business,
But, like, what was
and
his business? What was his business?
he is a very successful serial founder of mostly gaming companies, so online
Oh, interesting.
gaming, and then
Yeah.
subsequently crypto. And he founded an esports league, and so he had
Wow.
a much more spectacular entrepreneurial career and several exits. So he's in a league of his own. And I just met him through
Yeah.
happenstance, but he was on a similar journey. So he was done with all of that. He had this great career in online gaming and crypto and esports, but now he wanted to do something truly purposeful. And he had also identified climate as the thing for him to work on and spend his rest of his career on. And he had read about this balcony solar thing that was taking off in
Yeah.
Europe and
In
Germany in
Europe.
particular, where people just hanging solar panels from their balconies and plugging them into a wall outlet. And he said, you've done some work in solar and you're from there. Can you help me build this? And yeah, we ended up founding Brightsaver
Hey,
together
there we go.
and
There's
are
the
now
start. Yeah.
bringing balcony solar to the US.
And balcony solar is meter by meter panel that literally put on your patio or your balcony in an apartment, plug it into the wall, and you get electricity coming into your unit.
Your circuitry, yes, exactly.
Wow. And is all of that manufactured in China, presumably,
It
the
mostly
panels?
is. Yeah.
Yes, okay, right. All right, so and is this fun? You're back in the game, you're building, and now you're doing something in the physical universe and helping, you more than
Absolutely. Yes.
administrating? Yes, right.
Building
Yeah.
again, building a company from scratch, building physical things. To your point, I think I didn't mention that I originally studied mechanical engineering back
Oh,
in Vienna. And then that got me into the patent law firm. And then suddenly I found myself building a career in software. But I always like to build things physically.
yeah.
And yes, here I am putting together solar panels and delivering them to customers and helping them set up the solar panels in their backyard and yeah, moving stuff around in the warehouse, driving the forklift. I'm loving
Yeah,
it.
doing it all, being the evangelist,
Yes,
there on the frontier, being the revolutionary, convincing the one person in the neighborhood to do it first, when it's not obvious,
exactly.
all
Yeah,
that frontier stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what a journey, Rupert. Like, what an amazing story. And you're still going and still building and saving the world at this point here. Really appreciate you sharing that story on the Practical Founders podcast. What advice do you give founders? You're sitting in the MBA class over at the Haas School in Berkeley at University of California. You're meeting other entrepreneurs out there and working with them. What's the most typical advice you give that would be useful for practical software founders out there, kind of doing it on, same kind of grinding way, but probably using AI tools more
Mhm.
these days? What kind of advice can you share that would be useful?
Yeah, certainly a few learnings that we talked about, but maybe starting where I have a lot of people in my MBA class now who are starting in entrepreneurship, who
Yeah.
are
Uh-huh.
mid-career, but would
Yeah.
really are kind of infected with the entrepreneurial bug. And I think one of the key piece of advice is really just do it and go all in. I think a lot of people are held back, especially if they've reached a certain comfort level. So a lot of my peers are mostly around 40. I think when we started the program, their median age was 40. And so they're spending this kind of money on this education, that means they've done relatively well in their careers.
Hmm.
And most of them have a family and a nice house and a nice car. So that means, of course, also a mortgage and a good job that pays for that. And it's not easy to leave that behind and go all in and do something completely new. So I think that's the struggle for most people. So a lot of them are now doing starting all sorts of side businesses and trying out things, and that's great. But once you think you're really onto something and you really want to get serious about it, you have to go all in. There's no great business has ever been built as just a side gig or a side hustle, I think.
Right.
And that's something I was never afraid to do. So
Yeah.
when I started IPfolio, that's that age. I was 38, and we had
Oh,
just moved to the Bay Area. I had one kid, and then we ended up having a second one shortly thereafter. And we were really living hand to mouth. This is not a not a cheap area of the world to live in. And when I started IPfolio, I was paying myself $6,000 per month, and my wife wasn't working, and I don't know how we made that work. Okay, it was
yeah.
15 years ago, so maybe today that would be $10,000 to live as a family in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's I think that's pretty much poverty line almost, as crazy as it sounds for listeners in many other parts of the world. But somehow I just really believed in it, and I decided to go all in, and we spent the savings we had, and then some that we didn't have, juggled a lot of different credit cards and then credit lines. And of course I had built some security because I owned the shares in that European company. I still owned some, so I knew there was some at least paper value there, but that wasn't easy to realize. I couldn't just turn around and sell those shares. But it just felt at that time, okay, this is what I need to do, and I need to be all in on it. So at some point, you just have to make that decision. So I think that's
Well, it's a little strange to hear somebody with a German accent saying you need to go all in, right? And
Mhm,
I think it's very counterculture,
mhm,
in
mhm.
Austria, in Germany, and Europe, the continent in general.
Yeah.
But there are adventures everywhere, and there's conservative people everywhere. So very exciting. Rupert, thanks again for sharing your story on the Practical Founders podcast. And, good luck on your Bright Savers adventure, the next quest. I look forward to seeing those in Home Depot someday.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Greg. It's been a pleasure, and take care.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.